Saturday, July the 31st, 2021, WWE issues a press release at 12:41 p.m. local time, saying they have come to terms on the release of Bray Wyatt. Now, we've seen a lot of high-profile WWE releases this year alone, but this one hits a little bit different. In the course of this video, you and I are going to take a look at the Husky decade-long career of Windham Rotunda in WWE. We'll follow the buzzards to the highs, we'll like the fireflies on the lows, and then we'll answer the fiendish question. Where did WWE go wrong with the Fiend Bray Wyatt? First, let me introduce you to Husky Harris, formerly Duke Rotunda in Florida Championship Wrestling. Husky made a big impression on NXT Season 2. Remember when it was a game show? We hated it. He was the rookie to the NXT Pro of one Cody Rhodes, and whilst he didn't win the show, he made enough of an impact to be added to Monday Night Raw as part of the Nexus, the invading developmental brand, who booted out a couple of members to make room for some new ones. And Husky made a bit of an impression as what was it they called him? The army tank with a Ferrari engine. Well, the tank got its tyres stolen when Randy Orton booted him in the head and sent him packing back to FCW. It was here in FCW that we started to see the creativity of Windham Rotunda. Well, we did, but we didn't. You see, he had piloted a character called Axel Mulligan, who had a Jason Voorhees-esque hockey mask on and just looked like a psychopath. And this never made it to TV. There are photos knocking around of this character. There's one of them right there. But higher-ups within FCW and WWE decided that it wasn't quite what they were looking for. So asked very politely to return him to Husky Harris. And this is the first time that we would see a character like this from the future Bray Wyatt. And it's one of those that, when you look back on it, shows how close we were to what we would eventually get. But let's talk about that another time. What was that name I said just then? Bray Wyatt. Yeah, well, that was what he became once the Husky Harris moniker fell off. He became weird cult leader, wonderfully wired, woolly, Waylon Mercy-esque lad, Bray Wyatt. And when FCW became NXT and the game show became the Games Show, did you get it? Because Triple H is running it. That's a good joke, that. Bray Wyatt was factored into that part of the developmental roster. It almost came to a very sudden end, as just as he was getting his motor running, he'd had his debut match as Bray Wyatt. He suffered a pectoral injury that required surgery. This actually ended up becoming a bit of a blessing in disguise, because it allowed Bray Wyatt to sit at ringside in his rocking chair and guide the Wyatt family to success. Luke Harper and Eric Rowan debuted at this time, and it allowed Wyatt to work on the character more, to put together some of these more spooky promos and this deep tone that he used, and allowed him just to carve a niche for himself as that character. He would get better in 2013, and we would see the Wyatt family get called up to Monday Night Raw. There was a lot of buzz about the Wyatts in NXT that simply couldn't be ignored by the guys on the main roster. And what could possibly go wrong? An NXT call-up. I'm sure it'll be fine. It actually was. It actually was. Their first act was to beat up Kane. They then got into feuds with CM Punk, Daniel Bryan, and they had that square off with The Shield, the head of Elimination Chamber that year, the This Is Awesome chance. It was a great moment. Felt like big things for the Wyatt family. And for one Bray Wyatt, it was about to get bigger, because he was squaring up to a dust-up against John Cena at WrestleMania. It don't get much bigger than that for a guy who's not long been on the main roster. See, Bray Wyatt at this point was the earwig inside John Cena's head, trying to coax out the dark side of Wabadoo Man. And it looked like he was going to be successful at it. There was a couple of occasions where we almost saw that the eyes of John Cena sort of glaze over, and he turned to the dark side. And we thought at WrestleMania we were going to see Bray Wyatt pick up that big win on John Cena when he finally digs deep and finds that evil. But instead, what happened was good prevailed. John Cena beat him clean. 1, 2, 3. This was the start of a weird, horrible trend for one Bray Wyatt. kind of anti-WrestleMania streak. And not just WrestleMania, pretty much every major feud Bray Wyatt had didn't go so well for him. Oh, Undertaker, I'm going to square up to you at WrestleMania. I'm going to put the final nail in your coffin. Oh, I've just been quite decisively defeated. Hey, Randy Orton, I'm going to beat you proper for all the things you've done to me at WrestleMania. Oh, I've just been quite decisively defeated. I even tried the trick of putting a picture of horrible creatures onto the ring canvas. Let's talk about the spookiness for a little bit, because WWE did lean into this a little bit and try and create that spooky visage for Bray Wyatt, and it had mixed responses, mixed reactions, sometimes boos. I'm talking about off the back of the final deletion. The Wyatt compound match we had between the New Day and the Wyatt family, and it was just like their first dalliances into what would become cinematic wrestling during the pandemic era, and it just didn't quite touch the sides for anybody. Just to refer back to it as well, that PowerPoint presentation beamed onto the ring canvas thing from Randy Orton got booed by the crowd. They kind of saw through all of that nonsense. Randy Orton wouldn't be too far away from a lot of Bray Wyatt's nonsense. The House of Horrors match, in which Bray Wyatt and Randy Orton would fight around his rather beautifully decorated home, got a mixed response from the live crowd and memes from the crowd watching at home. It was an attempt to make spooky from Bray Wyatt WWE style that just didn't quite scan. No better example of that was the feud he had with Finn Balor, which saw Bray Wyatt promise the return of Sister Abigail, this mythical Wyatt family member that apparently is dead or but in the air somewhere, I guess. And we did see Sister Abigail. There's Sister Abigail. Yay! It's Bray Wyatt in a veil with a high-pitched voice. We were going to see Sister Abigail versus Finn Balor at TLC. That ended up not happening because Bray Wyatt had an illness, which meant he couldn't compete on the night, and the feud just quietly disappeared. WWE just sort of dropped it and just popped it to the side there. Bray Wyatt made an unceremonious return to the company about a month or so later. Started a feud with Matt Hardy that was filled with promise. We got an ultimate deletion out of it, which was them capitalizing on the popularity of the final deletion from Impact Wrestling. And even though that was full of fun and nonsense, again, there was this WWE tone to it that just didn't quite land. Bray Wyatt got hoisted into the lake of reincarnation, and we didn't see him again until WrestleMania, when he helped Matt Hardy win the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. All of a sudden, we have a tag team, the Deleters of Worlds, as they were known. They won the Raw tag titles. They lost the Raw tag titles. Then Matt Hardy took some time off to recover from some injuries, and it all just went a bit quiet. There could have been so much you could have done with that, and it's almost as if, Matt Hardy stepping away, WWE just kind of got bored and whatever. April 2019, the night after WrestleMania, we would see the return of Bray Wyatt. No longer as a wretched, dreadlocked eater of worlds, no longer as a cult leader, he is now Bray Wyatt, the host of the Firefly Fun House, a demented Mr. Rogers with a monster lurking within. These promos and vignettes just popped off the screen. They were so different to everything WWE was doing at that time. And Bray Wyatt was given a lot of creative freedom to conjure up characters to be part of the Firefly Fun House, all of which told stories about his past. And somehow Bray Wyatt was able to weave in all these plot holes and such to make one consistent story. He was so good at doing that, whereby he would take things where the company would have given up on it and made it part of the narrative. And that was what we saw through the Firefly Fun House. And these segments really jumped out of people, and they were very, very entertaining. And it was when we met this monster within at SummerSlam that heads really turned. The Fiend made the debut at SummerSlam 2019, and oh, what a moment. That mask designed by the horror special effects company, the music remixed by Code Orange, the lantern in the shape of old Bray Wyatt's head, the monstrous visage, the lighting effects, sometimes the lighting effects. it just created something that just popped off the page, and there was love for it. Merchandise sales were really high for stuff associated with The Fiend. You saw a lot of love from the crowd, so much so that WWE went, right, we need to use this more. And this is where WWE has always fallen down in their time with Bray Wyatt, where The Fiend is a character that really lent itself to a slow burn. What ended up happening instead was we would see The Fiend pushed in front of live crowds far too often. We would see WWE take the reins of the character, put The Fiend in a no-win situation against Seth Rollins inside a Hell in a Cell that just almost destroyed The Fiend's character entirely. The Fiend became a champion in WWE when The Fiend is one of those characters that didn't need a belt, made him a champion. And what did they do? Well, it was a nondescript title reign that ended when WWE took this guy who had all this promise, all this character, all this energy, placed him in the middle of the motorway for Goldberg to run him down in an event outside of America. That was a tough pill to swallow, but somehow The Fiend was able to, with the help of Bray Wyatt's creative energy, able to somehow keep this storyline all tied together. It's like WWE just keep throwing the character into these non-Fiend-like situations because they just go, it's a popular character, pal. This is good. and Bray Wyatt is kind of like the gif of Gromit from Wallace and Gromit, putting the train tracks in front of the train, trying to build this character as he goes. 2020 ended up being quite an important year for The Fiend, as no crowd meant you could probably do some more silly hijinks, and they did. We saw the psychedelic music video that was the Firefly Fun House match between him and John Cena. Finally saw him getting a kind of WrestleMania win against somebody. Nice to see. You love to see it. We saw him getting thrown into a swamp by Braun Strowman, and we saw him set fire to by Randy Orton. In amongst all of this, we saw what we didn't know at the time was the beginning of the end for The Fiend, and that was the arrival of Alexa Bliss into the story. Alexa Bliss was coaxed in by The Fiend and eventually infused with the Fiend's powers. And we had a really nice dynamic here. I think fantasy bookers were writing their hands off, talking about how this was going to be the arrival of Sister Abigail. And it kind of was. We had a spooky Alexa Bliss, a Mrs. Fiend, if you will. But WWE, recognizing the reactions that they were getting for The Fiend, turned The Fiend and Alexa Bliss babyface. It's a character that works so much better as a heel, but simply going, the crowd love them, pal, will make them good guys. And suddenly having that good guy mentality really changed The Fiend. Not for the better either. The final stand of The Fiend came at WrestleMania earlier this year against Randy Orton. Alexa Bliss had pulled The Fiend back from purgatory after he'd been set fire to for this match, this showdown, this dust-up against Randall Keith. And it was going fine for The Fiend until he was distracted by Alexa Bliss with tar pouring down her face. This led to a singular RKO and a defeat for The Fiend. As Fiend and Bliss stare at each other, the lights go out, the lights come back on, both are gone, and the crowd are booing. The following night on Monday Night Raw, Bray Wyatt is back in the Firefly Fun House, and in an eerily prophetic episode of the Fun House, he talks about how he feels great and it's time for a new season of the Fun House, and he will return and the show will be back bigger and stronger. And then at the end, he does a very somber "see ya" to the camera. And that's the last that we see of Bray Wyatt and The Fiend in WWE. And this weekend, well, as we know, no longer with the company. Where did WWE go wrong with Bray Wyatt? Bray Wyatt, Windham Rotunda, is an incredibly creative soul. Like an Imagineer of a generation when it comes to conjuring characters and creating story. But he was a round peg in a square hole in WWE, a company that prides itself on having everything in its place and having a singular vision. Somebody who comes along with a vision that is not theirs is difficult for them to handle. We've seen it over many, many years. When somebody comes along that develops a following of their own, they either get snubbed out or WWE tries to control it and can't. Every time Bray Wyatt started getting the motor running on a course to something, with something that he created, WWE would take the wheel. And then they get bored, the journey being too long, and they pull into the side. That happened on multiple occasions, and it's happened one final time here. The real end of things for The Fiend and Bray Wyatt in WWE actually came in an office. Nick Khan, who is desperate to make sure that WWE is back well and truly in the black, is part of the system of cutting a lot of big contracts with WWE. That's why we've seen so many heavy hitters let go from the company. And whilst to another wrestling promotion, Bray Wyatt would be priceless, to WWE at this time, he's pricey. And all they see is this number and this contract at the bottom. And that's a big reason as to why Bray Wyatt is no longer with the company. He's somebody that had hot and cold interactions with Vince McMahon, as we've discovered. And he's somebody that was on a big money deal, who wasn't doing a lot. And you know, when you're removed from the product, you look at that and go, well, if he's not doing anything, we're paying him all this money, why do we keep him around? WWE is in a state at the moment of flux, it feels like. There's some big change coming with the company. We can see a certain move towards a more family-friendly product once again. You only have to look at characters like Nikki ASH, who is very much a pioneer for younger fans to come in, and something with the horrorscape that is the Fiend rather, it just doesn't match that ideology. It just doesn't. And also, WWE is at a point now where, and this sounds like a dig, and it's not. It's just the way that it is. WWE aren't in the market for making stars anymore. They're not. They're not looking for the next Austin. They're not looking for the next Rock. The star is WWE. They want it so they can put that logo on a marquee and people buy tickets. They're not looking to make a star that can then take their pulling power elsewhere, a la The Rock did. They're not looking for that. They're looking for interchangeable bodies that are priced at a reasonable price that can carry that banner. And unfortunately, The Fiend, Bray Wyatt, is a casualty of that. It's a character that leapt off the page from WWE. And WWE wants people to keep firmly looking at the book. WWE is the star, none of the wrestlers. And that's not a dig. That's just kind of the way it is. I think the best thing for Bray Wyatt wasn't to let him in. The best thing for Bray Wyatt was to let him out. Stay safe. Love you, bye.